The battle for the Syrian town of Kobani began on September 14, 2014 and ended on March 15, 2015. ISIS attempts to capture the town were unsuccessful. Kobani was for ISIS what Stalingrad was for the Nazis. 70% of the town was destroyed in the battle. Casualties are estimated at 2,000 to 5,000 ISIS fighters were killed. Over 1,000 anti-ISIS Kurdish forces were killed in the battle.
I don't think I've seen or heard anything quite like it for a very, very long time. We went as close as we could get this morning, right down next to the border, probably 200 or 300 yards from the border, and the fighting was absolutely raging on the other side. I don't know how much you can see on this line of the scene in Kobani this morning and early this afternoon, but parts of the city are obscured by black smoke. There are huge explosions from time to time, and the sheer volume of gunfire was just terrifying. It seemed as if dozens and dozens of weapons were firing at once. There were heavy machine guns firing, grenade explosions all the time. That is the area, the eastern edge of the city, which Islamic State fighters entered a couple of days ago. Their flags, crucially, are still flying from a building and a hill over in that area. But the fighting for those eastern streets is absolutely ferocious. Meanwhile, mostly to the west, we have seen a succession of airstrikes, apparent airstrikes. We haven't had those confirmed by the Pentagon. Some of those have been enormous as well. One vast black cross-shaped cloud that rose above the town. And it seems as though what the coalition, the US coalition, is doing is attempting to halt the advance of Islamic State fighters from the west, while these intense street battles go on with the defenders of the city and the Islamic State fighters in the east.
Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga forces have entered the Syrian town of Kobani. There they are joining hundreds of Syrian Kurdish and opposition fighters to take on the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The Peshmerga have been waiting on the Turkish-Syria border since Wednesday. Reconnaissance teams have been sent in over the last few days, but now it seems they are ready to begin their fight. Kobani having gained great significance, not just for the Kurdish forces defending it, but also for Turkey. Its leaders have been watching developments there closely. More on that later. First, an exclusive report from inside Kobani by Al Jazeera's Ryan Rifai.
We are now standing in the western neighborhoods of Ain al-Arab, commonly known as Kobani. These neighborhoods represent the springboard from which Kurdish forces are fending off ISIL attacks, who are now in desperate attempt to control these areas and have a firm grip on areas to the east. To the right are the northern neighborhoods of Kobani, where the higher ridges can be seen in the backdrop. On these ridges, the Turkish army and its forces are positioned, closely monitoring the fighting taking place inside the city. The armed opposition groups who have recently joined the Kurdish forces are now deployed to the front lines fighting ISIL, waiting for orders from the Joint Command, who are in turn waiting for the arrival of Peshmerga Kurdish forces with their superior gear and equipment. This will shift the balance of power on the ground. Sources say the Syrian Kurdish forces are planning a new assault against ISIL positions in Kobani.
Kobani sits right on the border with Turkey and would represent a significant prize for Islamic State militants. It would give them a strategic foothold on the doorstep of a major NATO ally. And what's more, it would show the world that US airstrikes are not enough to stop its advance in the region, while of course control there would put IS in striking distance of Turkey itself. But despite its close proximity, Turkey says it will not send troops in.
It's not realistic to expect Turkey to conduct a ground operation on its own. We are holding talks. Once there is a common decision, Turkey will not hold back away from playing its part.
Turkey's Kurds feel betrayed and have taken to the streets demanding more be done. 12 people have died in the clashes. Turkey is reluctant to help for two reasons. It views the Kurdish forces as its enemy, and it still wants to see the fall of President Assad in Syria, and his most powerful opponent is Islamic State. US airstrikes are ongoing in the town, but do not appear to have stopped the militants' advance. However, this does not seem to be of great concern to the US.
As horrific as it is to watch in real time what's happening in Kobani, it's also important to remember you have to step back and understand the strategic objective. The original targets of our efforts have been the command and control centers, the infrastructure. We're trying to deprive the ISIL of the overall ability to wage this, not just in Kobani, but throughout Syria and into Iraq.
Islamic State is reportedly in control of a third of the town, and the terrorists' black flag can be seen fluttering at the top of buildings. The battle for Kobani is just one small part of the wider confrontation with Islamic State, but it shows clearly the limit of air power and the deepening complexity of this whole
The Islamic
conflict.
State offensive against the Kurdish stronghold of Kobani on the Syrian border with Turkey has reportedly been halted. However, almost half the town is now controlled by the extremists, and in this latest video their flag can be seen flying over some districts. Now, fierce fighting continues as the US carries out a fresh round of airstrikes, but despite international calls to help Kobani, neighbouring Turkey is refusing to intervene or even let refugees cross the border. And as Murat Gazdiev reports, if the town falls, thousands of civilians will be at the mercy of Islamic State.
After hours in search of a good vantage point, we finally found ourselves overlooking a battleground so crucial it could decide the borders of the Middle East for years to come.
This is Kobani city, perhaps the hottest spot in the Middle East today. The entire city is surrounded by the Islamic State, apart from this narrow corridor on the border with Turkey. Kurdish fighters are still holding out in the north. They say they won't be able to hold out for long. And if they aren't able to hold out, the United Nations is warning of a massacre by Islamist forces against Kurds. There's a little refugee city over there. You can see those people are not being let into Turkey. So if the Islamic State does defeat the Kurds here, they will be at jihadists' mercy.
And all the signs say that the Kurds are fighting a losing battle. Outmanned, outgunned and cut off from supplies, the defenders still alive have all but been written off, even by their allies. Our stay at the vantage point, though, was quickly cut short.
We've just been asked to go down this hill by a Turkish officer. He's asked us to leave because apparently this area is very dangerous. The caliber of weapons being used by the Islamic State is large. They're using large caliber weapons, and this area is occasionally being hit by mortar, by artillery fire. Plus, this is the hill from which Turkish forces, if asked to go into combat, this is where they'll start shooting from.
Despite Parliament giving the green light to send in the troops and the tremendous pressure from both Turkey's allies and the country's 15 million Kurds, the president isn't budging.
They are refusing to help because of political reasons. Turkey has had problems with its Kurdish population for years, and it is likely that for that reason it wants to see Kobani wiped out.
Turkey wants to see the annihilation of all Kurds, but that will never happen. We are strong people and we have our own forces. Unfortunately, though, we do not have the weapons, but despite that, we will defend our city.
These are the Turkish tanks and artillery pieces that have been sent to Kobani by Ankara, by the Turkish government. They were originally on this hill up here, but they pulled back, maybe for their safety, maybe for other reasons, political ones perhaps. But the town of Kobani itself is under constant air attack. US-led airstrikes are pounding Islamist positions, but so far they're having little effect in the strategic sense, in the biggest sense.
The fight for this Kurdish stronghold is vicious, and its outcome could shape politics and borders in the region for years to come. But that's all in the long term. For now, though, thousands of civilians in and around Kobani are anxiously awaiting a decision from the Turkish president, one that they fear will never come. Murat Gazdiev, RT, on the Turkey-Syria border.
Well, the battle around Kobani has been going on for months. On Sunday, photographs emerged purporting to show the bodies of 3 Kurdish fighters killed in July by chemical weapons. We got some expert opinion on the photos published in a Middle East journal.
Some of the blisters would be consistent with a blister agent like mustard. So if they are real, there is a very strong chance that they might be some sort of chemical agent, possibly mustard.
These chemical weapons could come from a variety of sources, depending on how sophisticated these chemical weapons is. But according to the reports, these were not very sophisticated chemical weapons. It's more likely that it is some form of chlorine gas. It's very common, very easy to manufacture with the kind of equipment and know-how that the IS has shown it has already.
According to Iraqi and Kurdish officials, ethnic Kurds are helping members of the Islamic State group in the battle for the key Syrian Kurdish town of Kobani, sharing their knowledge of the local terrain and language with the extremists. It's not clear how many Kurds are aiding the estimated 3,000 Islamic State militants in the Kobani area and fighting against their own Kurdish brethren, but activists say they're playing a major role in the 7-week-old conflict near the Turkish border.
We're now in a defense position 100 meters away from the IS group positions. There's only one road that separates us from IS terrorist militants.
From a strategic hilltop, Islamic State fighters with the Syrian Kurdish town of Kobani in their sights. These are unverified images, but with reports that IS is edging ever further into this besieged town on the border with Turkey, a humanitarian effort is underway to try to evacuate the few thousand civilians remaining there. A blast apparently from a coalition airstrike on an IS position around the town. The battle for Kobani has become the focus and a key test right now of the struggle and the strategy against Islamic State.
They launched an airstrike this morning, but I wish this had been done 5 or 10 days ago so these vultures wouldn't massacre the whole town and innocent people wouldn't die.
More unverified images, this time the beleaguered Kurdish defenders. They have put up stiff resistance, but they're outgunned. They also say the coalition airstrikes have been too little too late. They're desperate for more international help, but from where? Just across the border in Turkey, Turkish security forces move in to break up a gathering crowd of Kurds, angered about what's happening in Kobani. But with its own Kurdish separatist concerns, the Turkish government is deeply ambivalent about whether to intervene here. It would be a huge step. So for now, Turkey's powerful military is watching and waiting. Turkey is setting conditions for getting more involved against Islamic State. The coalition should do more to confront the Syrian government and to create a buffer zone for refugees from the Syrian conflict. But all the time, the questions over the strategy against IS and whether airstrikes are having any effect in stopping these fighters in their tracks are growing.
The Islamic State militant group has stepped up their assaults on Kobani and are believed to be less than 1 kilometre away. The Syrian city near the Turkish border has been the site of intense fighting for weeks. Kurdish forces defending the area warned of a massacre if it fell to the insurgents. More than 130,000 refugees fled to Turkey last weekend to escape the violence. US-led forces carried out 4 airstrikes on militants on Wednesday and Thursday around Raqqa and 1 near the besieged city of Kobani, but so far they appear to be doing little to halt their advance. The US military said that targets included training compounds, headquarters, storage facilities and a finance center. IS fighters broadcast these images online of what they say is damage done to schools and hospitals in Tel Abyad by the coalition airstrikes, though the video is yet to be independently verified.
Kurdish fighters backed by intense U.S.-led airstrikes pushed the Islamic State group almost entirely out of the Syrian town of Kobani on Monday, marking a major loss for extremists whose hopes for easy victory dissolved into a bloody, costly siege that seems close to ending in defeat. Fighters raised a Kurdish flag on a hill in the border town near Turkey that once flew the Islamic State's group black banner. It represents a key conquest both for the embattled Kurds and the U.S.-led coalition, whose American coordinator had predicted that the Islamic State group would impale itself on Kobani. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and senior Kurdish official Idris Nassan said the Islamic State group had been nearly expelled, with some sporadic fighting on the eastern edges of the town.
Every street, every inch of Kobani is testament to the apocalypse that the Islamic State brought here. For 4 months they faced each other, sometimes just yards apart, and there are still plenty of dangers here. Unexploded mortars, booby traps, but IS is gone. It's the Kurds who are left standing, with trophies from the fight. This fighter tells me IS used car bombs packed with explosives to target our checkpoints. These men are weary. Their victory came unexpectedly, and the outcome is a shock. The Islamic State, here at least, has been beaten. Most of its people fled Kobani. Those who stayed draped curtains across the roads to hide out of sight from IS snipers. I met one of the families who refused to leave. Hello. Hello. Rahima and her 12 children and grandchildren stayed throughout the worst of the fighting.
We faced difficulties. We were hungry, we were thirsty, but we are no different from the fighters. They stayed and we stayed. We were in the basement. When they had food, they shared it with us. It was hard. But thank God, we knew we would win.
Those who haven't seen the evil that took place here will see it now. Kurdish officials didn't abandon us. We are going to school now, and we are very happy because we will be able to go back to our villages. They liberated our lands.
In the ruins, IS fighters left behind messages. This one from a sniper makes a promise to the town of bloodshed, beheadings and destruction. Kobani is now at peace. The streets, or what's left of them, are now silent, but driving the Islamic State from here came at tremendous cost. Hundreds of coalition airstrikes, which have flattened most of the town. And the Islamic State didn't go far. They're less than 5 miles from here. So while Kobani has been liberated, the fight against the militants goes on. We headed east, closer to the front lines. Here, the Kurdish fighters are young and they're determined. But still, on 3 sides, they're surrounded by the Islamic State.
اف سرکفتنا کی پرمازن بو فقط اساس سرکفتنا مازن ام باجر ببن ساغلامی و ام در دور کوبانی جرزبار بکن یعنی ام نایل کو د آقا کوبانی گندا دادن.
In the war against the Islamic State, the battle for Kobani will be remembered. These streets tell that with foreign help, IS can be defeated, but only at great sacrifice. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Kobani in Syria.